From the outside, the Exide Technologies plant on Indiana Avenue looks like many of the hundreds of other businesses that populate Vernon. It's a small city southeast of downtown Los Angeles with a population of only 114 people. Inside, the plant looks like something out of an environmentalist's nightmare. For decades, batteries of all kinds were recycled here. Their most toxic ingredient was lead, known to cause serious health problems for humans when it gets into their bodies. Children are especially vulnerable to the effects of lead poisoning, ranging from brain damage to death. The pollutants that poured out of the Exide plant didn't just stay there. They spread to practically every other community downwind from Vernon. In East Los Angeles, for example, cleanup crews continue to remove lead-contaminated dirt and anything else that could have been made toxic by airborne lead, while other crews continually monitor the human consequences, especially for children. Finally, a week ago last Friday, Exide agreed to permanently close its Vernon plant.
People of Vernon and East Los Angeles are entitled to work, live, and raise their children in a neighborhood where they do not have to fear that a polluter may have contaminated their air, ground, and water.
Our long nightmare is over. We have attended dozens and dozens of meetings and hearings, always fighting for what we saw as something obvious. Exide was poisoning our community, and it had to be closed. We look forward now to a thorough and just cleanup of our homes and neighborhoods.
Accomplishing that will take years. Meanwhile, there are many other places in Southern California where the lessons learned from the Exide experience can and need to be put to good use. Good Sunday morning, everybody. Our guest today, Angelo Bellomo. He is the director of the environmental health portion of the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health. Exide, are we done with Exide, or do we still have more to do?
No, we've reached an important milestone in that the facility will not continue to pollute the surrounding environment, but it's left behind a lot of conditions that will need to be dealt with, not only within the facility, Tony, but also in the surrounding community, as was indicated earlier.
I would imagine that just getting, there must be tons and tons, well, maybe not tons. There must be a lot of crap in there, to be perfectly candid.
Yeah, no, that's true. There's the physical equipment itself that will have to be disassembled. And then once all of that is disassembled, we have to deal with the soil and underlying groundwater that's been contaminated. And then there's the whole question of what kind of cleanup needs to take place in the surrounding communities.
And while that's going on, is there going to be additional stuff thrown into the air?
When a site is shut down like this and the cleanup begins and the investigation begins, there's very tight controls over how the facility will be disassembled, and the controls that are in place will ensure that we don't create more problems while this one's being cleaned up.
So what was going on, Angelo, 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago, when businesses like this, industries like this were allowed to, in many ways, congregate in certain neighborhoods like East LA, Boyle Heights, Vernon, so on and so forth?
Right. Well, there's no question we can look throughout the state of California, even within the county of Los Angeles, and find that there are some communities that have an inordinate share of toxic problems. Mm-hmm. And those congregation, as you say, of industry, even when you have those industries in compliance with the regulations, their sheer numbers could present a problem to residents that maybe have been sited too close to those industries. Mm-hmm. We have a number of communities throughout Los Angeles County that we have to look at in a more systematic way. We can't regulate simply facility by facility. We almost have to take a more general look at what's going on in the community, what is the total or cumulative risk presented by the variety of industries and other sources, and how can we systematically reduce that overall level of risk.
You have put together a strike team?
Well, the Board of Supervisors last year had created a strike team whose purpose is to work with state, federal, and local regulatory officials. And because the strike team is headed by the Department of Public Health, to provide a public health perspective that we believe could help the regulatory agencies and inform the decisions of not only the regulators, but the other agencies like the planning departments. We can help them develop policies that will put public health considerations to a higher level than perhaps they have been in the past.
But as soon as you mention more than one agency, as a journalist, the lights go off in my head thinking, oh, we're going to have red tape, we're going to have bureaucracy, we're going to have a lack of communication. Is there a dedication to everybody sharing information, working together?
Well, that's always the challenge, of course, Tony, but the purpose of the strike team, as we're utilizing it, is to cut through all that red tape, to basically bring the agencies together and to say, look, let's see what we can do as a strike team that we can't do independently if we're working independently. And so we have very good methods for getting the agencies to share data. We'll have to see how it works. It didn't work as well as it should have in the case of Exide, but I think we've all learned something from that. And we're going to now take it from this point, and we're going to implement this strike team concept in 2 pilot communities initially, and then hopefully it will be a mainstream program throughout the county of LA.
Before we show you, our viewers a map, the money, where's the money going to come from for all of this?
Well, Tony, the laws that we have in the state of California that are applicable in LA County, they've been on the books for a long time. The additional funding isn't really a problem for us because all we're really talking about doing, no new programs, simply getting those programs that are in existence to talk to one another.
Making them more efficient.
Exactly.
All right, so we've got, we saw, I had a chance to look at a report that had about 18 communities that we're looking at, and we put together a map. Our producer Kathy Gang put together a map. 2 of the areas that you're going to be focusing on are East Los Angeles. That's the general area where Exide was, as well as the Florence Firestone district, which is down toward Huntington Park. It's another area where there was a massive industrial presence. But then we just randomly selected 3 other communities. One of them is Avocado Heights, way out in the San Gabriel Valley, West Whittier, Los Nietos, which is off in that direction toward Orange County, and then West Carson. We selected those other communities simply to illustrate to our viewers that is it safe to say that no matter where you live in the county, you have some sort of exposure?
Yes, and let me say it a slightly different way.
Okay.
The baseline level of exposure, or let's call it the background level of exposure in LA County, is generally elevated just simply because we're a large urbanized area and we have lots of freeway systems and industry that's operating here. So it's a good feature, but that really contributes to a baseline that we want to try to hold at a certain level. Now, if you're looking at communities that are situated very close to, let's say, a freeway system, or very close to an industry, they're almost in the shadow of an industry, for example, they're going to get not only the baseline pollution, but they'll get some additional risk just simply because they're in close proximity to the source.
Give us some sense of how important or how much of a source of pollution the freeways are. I'm getting the sense that it's bigger than maybe I thought.
Well, it's a large source of pollution, but in recent decades, the pollution levels have been reduced because we have ambient air quality standards that we've implemented very successfully, I think, in the Southland. But what we're really talking about here is not so much the general level of pollution and the attainment of ambient air quality standards. We're on a very good track there. We're talking about those communities that are in close proximity to a freeway. So if we say that we've been very successful in LA, we meet certain air quality standards, that's wonderful. But we can't neglect the fact that for some of our homes, they don't have the same ambient air quality that the LA basin does in general. They're too close. These communities are in close proximity to a freeway or to a facility, so they're getting that pollution before it has a chance to spread out and dilute throughout the basin.
I imagine there's a lot of variation, but typically how close does one have to be to a freeway to be impacted by this?
Well, it really depends, but generally we'd like to see developments at least 500 feet away, and there are studies that have been done that suggest that it could be a factor of 5 or 10, even greater than that, before you start to reach what we call an ambient or a background level. But I think your map points out a very good feature, which is that throughout the LA basin, we've got communities that If they are close to a source, and some of these communities that you listed up there, if they're close to a source, then they will have elevated levels of contaminants and their risk will be greater. So even when you look in the west side has generally very good levels of air quality. But for a community that is sited very close to a freeway or another emission source, they may be getting more pollution than they should.
And typically, let's focus on freeways, if it's okay with
Sure.
you. But typically, in these areas where you have an increase, what are we looking at? Cancer, diabetes, what?
Well, cancer has certainly been associated with exhaust emissions, but so has heart disease, and the contaminants that are coming off of a freeway is a broad spectrum of contaminants, so it could contribute to a wide range of health effects beyond those two.
Things have obviously improved since the old days before catalytic converters.
Yes, they have. So again, ambient levels and background levels of air quality throughout the basin have improved considerably.
There was also a period, we were talking about this before we started doing the program, there was a time some years ago, but I remember that the AQMD, among other agencies, was cracking down on things like dry cleaners and
Oh, yes,
barbecue places and so on.
Absolutely.
That's been effective?
It has been effective. And if you look at those individual sources, the emissions have been greatly reduced. So again, just to compare this, we're looking at specific communities that are, by their very nature, how they've been located, they are too close, very close to polluting sources, and we have to take a slightly different tack there if we're going to reduce the risk that those communities are subject to.
Before we take a break, you mentioned the west side, and I assume that it's the proximity to the ocean that keeps the air.
Very favorable meteorology that does clean the air, but there's a lesser preponderance of heavy polluting industries along the coast as well. And so generally background levels are much lower than they are in other parts of the county.
And to flip that over, if one lives in the San Fernando Valley, the San Gabriel Valley, because they are valleys and encircled, do they tend to have higher concentrations just because of the geography?
It's both the geography as well as the environmental conditions. The same conditions that are favorable along the coastline are problematic within the valleys.
We're going to take a break. We'll do that now, and when we come back, we'll talk more about the dangers that are out there for all of us.